Hello and welcome to another LioranBoard tutorial video. Given the announcement in Discord the other day that Twitch's Kraken API is going to be removed, and as such some features and extensions for LioranBoard 1 will stop working, and that LioranBoard 1 support in the Discord will stop from March the 1st due to OBS WebSocket 5 being actively worked on, I figured that today we would instead look at some of the LioranBoard 1 options for pre-made buttons and convert them into LioranBoard 2 buttons. If you don't know what I'm talking about, inside LioranBoard 1, when you're in a new deck, you had the option to create buttons, either a blank button, paste it if you already had the code in your clipboard, import JSON from outside, and pre-made examples. These are the pre-made example buttons that we will be looking at today. These 5 down here are the ones that are going to stop working if you keep using LioranBoard after the end of February, when the Kraken API is being removed. Anything that still uses the Helix API, which LioranBoard 2 does use, will still work. It's only the Kraken part that's being removed. Some of these buttons are very simple, others require a little bit more work, given the changes between LioranBoard 1 and 2. Without further ado, let's get on with the first button, and that's play audio. So I've made this deck here, which will be available in a GitHub link in the video's description, and also on the button examples section of the Discord. I've created all of the buttons that you could have created using the pre-made examples option. Like I said, the first one we're going to look at is the play audio button. This is a very simple one in that it's just one command, play sound effect. You can either paste the sounds file path directly into this box here, or you can press this button here to open up a file explorer. You then have the option to preview the sound through this button, and you can adjust the volume level with this slider. It defaults to about 30% and goes all the way up to 100%. This save sound ID box is used for if you want to use other sound effect commands on the same sound effect. So for example, there is a sound effect change volume, which will temporarily change the volume of your currently playing sound effect. You need to provide the ID that you save here in order for it to affect it. And that's all there is to play a sound effect. The next button we have is the stop audio button. This is again just one command, the stop sound effect command. And you can either provide a specific sound ID that you set up when you did the play sound effect command, or you can use the word all to stop all sounds being played through LioranBoard. The next button we'll look at is the start stop recording button. This is a toggle that will let you start and stop the recording of OBS. The first command is a fetch OBS data command that's asking for the recording status and is going to fetch the value is recording and save it as a variable, and then wait until that variable exists. It's then going to get the ID of this button. So for this one, it's LB1 toggle rec, and then it's going to look at that is recording variable. It's going to ask, is it 0? If it is 0, it means OBS is not currently recording. So we will ask OBS to start recording, and we'll also modify this button, because we're using the button ID variable from above, to change the color to be red. If we are recording, OBS will send back a 1 for is recording, which is not 0. Therefore, we will ask OBS to stop recording, and we will modify the button to change the color back to the gray that it was. We will then delete a variable at the end so that the next time we run the button, we can get fresh data. The next button is very similar. It's a pause and resume recording toggle. For this one, again, we're getting recording status from OBS, but instead of looking for is recording, we're looking for is recording paused. Again, we're going to wait until that variable exists, going to get the button's ID, and then we're going to ask, is recording paused variable 0? If it is, that means that we're not currently paused, so we're going to ask OBS to pause the recording, and again, we're going to change the button color so that it's blue. If we are currently paused, it will resume the recording, and it will set the color back to the gray. Again, we'll delete the variable at the end for fresh data next time. The last button in this row is the start stop streaming toggle, which is almost exactly the same as the start stop recording toggle, except that instead of asking for the recording, we're asking for the streaming status. Again, it's going to wait until that variable exists, then going to grab the button ID, then going to ask, is OBS streaming? If it's 0, that means it's not, and so we're going to start streaming, and we're going to modify this button to have a green background. If we are already streaming, then we're going to say stop streaming, and we're going to modify this button to go back to the gray colored background. And then again, we'll delete delete the variable, and so we have the ability to get fresh data next time. The next button that we're going to look at is the switch deck button, and that's slightly different in that it doesn't have any commands. Instead, to switch deck, you need to right click and edit the settings. Halfway down, you have switch deck option. Now, that defaults to no change, but you can tell it to go to the next deck in the list, the previous deck in the list, or you can select one of your decks from the deck list. I've picked this deck, so it will just switch to itself, which means nothing will change. The next one we're going to look at is the simulated keypress or macro. This can be useful if you have keyboard shortcuts set up for things like Discord or OBS or other programs, and you want to activate it by using your Stream Deck on your phone. For this, it's a simple command. It's a keyboard press. You click this box here, and you have the option of either picking from a list of buttons, or you have the option to just press a key. I'll press the T key, and you see it changed it to T. The same can also be true for the escape button, the enter button, a number pad 5, the page down button. It can even be used for function keys that don't exist on a regular keyboard, going all the way up to F32. There are also modifiers for the Control, Alt and Shift keys, and then the hold duration is in milliseconds. The standard hold duration for a regular key press is somewhere between 50 and 300 milliseconds, so 100 is perfectly fine. Please note that when playing games, a lot of the times these won't work because of anti-cheat mechanics built into the game. The next button we're looking at is the Open URL button, and that's again just a simple one command, Open URL. You enter the URL in this box, and when it activates, it will open the URL in a web browser. The next button we're going to look at is the execute file button. And again, that's a one-line command that's just execute program. You enter the file path for the program and you're ready to go. This could be useful for something like a stream preparation button, where you press it before you actually go live, before you open any of your programs, and it will automatically open your OBS, you can open your Discord, combine it with the previous button, and you can have it open your Twitch moderation page, your Spotify, lots of things that you can do with this button. Due to the major change in how variables are stored and handled in LioranBoard 2, these next two buttons act a little differently to how they did in LioranBoard 1. For the create and modify a variable button, we now have 3 different commands that you could use: set local variable, set button variable, and set global variable. A local variable is a variable stored inside the button you are currently working on. So in this case, it is ID1, or the create modifier variable button. Button variable allows you to access variables from a different button, and global variable allows you to access variables stored in the global area, a bit like how LioranBoard 1's variables work. For set local variable, all you need to do is put the variable name into this white box here, pick your operation. Equals means just set the variable to this. Plus equals means add this to the variable. Minus equal means subtract this from the variable. This is multiply the variable. This is divide the variable. Mod and div are both mathematical operations. Mod is the modulo or remainder operation. So when you divide one number by another, this will give you the remainder. For example, 7 mod 2 is 1 because 7 divided by 2 is 3 with 1 remainder. 8 mod 3 is 2 because 8 divided by 3 is 2 remainder 2. On the other hand, div gives you the integer of it. So 7 div 2 is 3 because 7 divided by 2 is 3 remainder 1. 8 div 3 is 2 because 8 divided by 3 is 2 remainder 2. The next 3 are all bitwise or logic operations. This one is AND, this one is XOR, and this one is OR. If you want more information on these, I will link to the documentation for LioranBoard 2, the variable operators section. These last two aren't yet documented in the documentation, so I don't know what they do. I will find out. I will put the information in the description. The yellow box is then what you want to change the variable in the white box. If it's another variable, it does not need to be wrapped because it's a yellow box. If it's a number, just enter it. If it is text, you need to put it in quote marks. These 3 boxes here are exactly the same in set button variable and in set global variable. The only difference is that in set button variable, it also asks you for the ID of the button where the variable is stored. For save load the variable, this works similar to LioranBoard 1, but I'll show you how to make it work for LioranBoard 2. The first 2 commands are our save commands. We have save number and save text. We have the file name, which is an ini file, which is stored in the main folder of LioranBoard 2. If you want to use a subfolder of that main folder, use a relative file path. So start with the slash, the folder name, another slash, so on, and then the file name at the end. The next box is for the section, and that is like the main header of that part of the ini file. The key will be the key name you want to save it to, and the value, again, a yellow box. This is either a variable without the wrapping or a number without quote marks. For the save text, the boxes are the same: file name, section, key. This time you can put the text in. This is a white box, so you can enter text without the quote marks. And if you want to put a variable in here, you have to wrap it. So for instance, if I have a variable called variable, at the moment, this will just store the word variable. I need to put $/ at the end and $$ at the start, and now it is the variable called variable. If I want to reference another button's variable, I need to put the ID of the button at the start inside the wrapping. So for instance, ID 1, and then I put a dot. So this is saying look inside button ID 1 for the variable and store that into the file. Load number and load text are the opposite of what we just did. It's looking for the file name and the section and the key, just like the other one is. But this time, instead of saving to the file, it's saving to LioranBoard inside a variable. So you need to put a variable name in this box. Although this is a white box, because it's called variable, you don't need to wrap it. So having the variable name like that will save it to a variable of that name. If you want to save it to a different button's variable, then you just start with the ID of the button, like so. Again, same is true for the text version. The next 3 buttons are all to do with switching scenes. The first one is just a basic switch scene. It's one command, scene switch. Unless you have multiple OBS instances, don't worry about this box. If you do, you can click that button next to it to pick which OBS instance you want to switch scenes on. Then you can either enter the scene name in the blue box, or you can pick from a list on the side. LioranBoard 2 makes moving back to the previous scene a lot easier by automatically storing the previous scene name inside a global variable. To access it, you use global.main.previous_scene, unless of course your OBS is not called main, in which case you need to change this part to match this part. Finally, we have switch scene with transition, where first we do a change scene transition on the scene name. The transition name you can get from OBS. Transitions include move, cut, fade, swipe, etc. And then how long transition will last. Then you do a scene switch. The next 3 buttons are all to do with toggling a source or a filter. The first one is muting and unmuting a source. There are 2 ways of doing this. The first one is with a simple source toggle mute command, where you put in the source name, and that will change the source's mute status between muted and unmuted automatically. However, if you want to do it a little bit more complicated, this second option is the way to do it. First, you need to fetch the OBS data, the get mute status of the source. You fetch the value muted, store it in a variable. Wait until the variable exists. Grab the button's ID, ask if the source is muted. If OBS returns 0, that means it's not muted, in which case you mute source. Otherwise it is muted, in which case you need to unmute the source. Lastly, you delete the button's variables to get fresh data for the next time you use it. Make sure you use either source toggle mute or all of these, not both. Otherwise you'll mute it and then unmute it, or you'll unmute it and then mute it. It will stay the same. So please make sure you only use one of these options. The next button is hiding and unhiding a source. This is the same general layout as the previous button, except this time we need to get scene item properties from OBS. The scene name and the source name change here. You're then looking for the visible value and storing it in a variable, waiting until the variable exists, also grabbing the button's ID. If is visible is 0, that means it's currently hidden. And so we have a source change visibility command where you change the scene name, the source name, and pick visible. If it's not 0, it is therefore visible. And so we source change visibility, scene name, source name, we make it invisible. Finally, we delete the button's variables. This button in this section is to hide and unhide a filter, and the commands are very similar. Fetch OBS data to get the source filter info, changing the source name and the filter name. We're looking to see if it's enabled. Wait until the variable exists, and we grab the button's ID. If is enabled is 0, it means it is not enabled. So you do a filter change visibility, source name, filter name, and click visible. If it is visible, you do filter change visibility, source name, filter name, make it invisible. Finally, you delete the button's variables. The next row are all to do with changing a source's settings. First, we have a text source, and we just want to change the name of it. So we have a source change text GDI plus, source name in, and then you put your new text in. Again, this is a white box, so it can contain variables. If you do, you will need to put the wrapping around it. The next button is a change media source file, and that's one command. Source change settings, put the source name in, and then the settings you want to change is the local underscore file, and you just paste the file path in this section here. The next one is change image source file. It's almost exactly the same, except this time the setting that you want to change is the file setting, and you put the file path in there. Otherwise, exactly the same. The fourth one in this row is a change browser source URL. For this one, we're telling the browser source that it is not a local file, and then we are putting the URL in there. The fifth button in this row is a change color source color, and this one's a bit difficult because of the way OBS handles colors. You'd think you could just put in the hex string and it would work, but it's very different to how it actually works. If you don't know, the first two letters of a hex string represent the red component, the next two represent the green, and the last two represent the blue. OBS swaps the red and the blue components around and also adds an alpha component to it. That's its opacity. So these four commands here take the color of the hex string that you want, converts it into a decimal number, swaps the red and the blue component, then converts the hex value or the full alpha, so 100% opacity, and then adds the two together and stores it in the color variable. You then have a source change settings where the settings that you change is the color and it's using the variable color. This also highlights the fact that you can use variables inside the settings, but just remember that if it's text, you will also need to put it inside quote marks. Color is a number, so it does not need to be. Finally, we have a change filter settings button, which is just a simple command, filter change settings, source name, the filter name, and then you have to work out what the setting is. The name of the settings goes inside these quote marks here, and then after the colon is the value that you want to change the settings to. Again, if it's text, you need to put it inside quote marks. You can also use a variable here. If you don't know the name of the setting that you wish to change, then you can use a fetch OBS data command to get the source filter info of the source names and the filter name. You want to fetch the value settings, and then you have to look inside the variable viewer for this button's variable settings, and then look at what it is called, and then put it inside these quote marks. This last row of buttons are the ones that will stop working in LioranBoard 1 because of the Kraken API being stopped. So I'll show you how to do them in LioranBoard 2. First, we have the change stream title and the change stream category buttons. These two buttons are basically the same. I'll show you the title one first. We're using a get user info command with our channel name in lowercase in this box here, and we're saving it to the variable user info. We're then waiting for the variable to exist. The variable that we get back will be what's called an object, and an object contains paired pieces of information. One of the pieces of information we'll get back is our channel ID, and we'll use that to get our channel info. If you already know your channel's ID, you can skip these first two commands. To reference the ID value, we use the userinfo.id wrap, and then we'll save the channel info as channel info and wait for it to exist. Channel info is again another object, and we need information from inside that. For a Twitch change stream info, you need four pieces of information: the login name, the title, the game, and the language. The login name is included inside channel info under broadcaster_login. So we use this variable here so we don't have to fill it out ourselves. This button is for changing the title. So we just put the title that we want in this big white box. It's a white box, so it does not need quote marks. The game name is stored inside channel info, as is the broadcaster language. So we can use these two variables to complete the command. For change stream category, it's exactly the same, except instead of changing the title, we're changing the game. So we can use the change info.title variable as the title, and we just change the game by putting it in this box. Again, white box doesn't require quote marks. If you leave this blank, you will have no category set. You cannot leave the title blank. The next button is a simple send chat message, and that is one command, Twitch send chat message. You put the message in the long white box so it does not need quote marks, and then the channel name is the channel name you wish to send the message in lowercase. These last two buttons on the list are not buttons that you press to do an action. They are more information buttons to be shown on your Stream Deck. Note the name of this button here is called Viewer Button, but when I swap to my Stream Deck, it shows it as offline. That's because this button and the latest follower button both change their label to give you information. I'll show you how they do that in the commands window back in LioranBoard. First, in latest follower button, we need to look at the triggers. Triggers for this button are a new follower on Twitch and the LioranBoard trigger Stream Deck or transmitter connected. What this means is that either of these two actions will trigger this button. The Stream Deck connecting and the transmitter connecting normally happen when you load OBS or during your prep phase, and the new follower will happen during your stream, so it will automatically update when you get a new follower. Looking inside the commands, given that there are two triggers to this button, the first thing we need to do is work out which was the one that triggered it. So we pull the trigger type and store it in the variable trigger. The switch statement then says, look at the variable trigger, and depending on what the result is, do the actions inside that case statement. The two options that we have are 10 and 6. 6 is triggered by a new follow. 10 is triggered by the transmitter connecting. The first thing that we need to do, if it's the transmitter connecting that triggers it, is we need to get the Twitch connection info for our channel name. We need the authorization token, and we need the user ID. The authorization token is used inside this header object in the bearer authorization code, and the client ID comes from a global variable. The next thing we do is an HTTP request to a Twitch API using Helix, which is going to continue despite Kraken being decommissioned. And we're looking for the user follows to our channel ID, and we're limiting it to 1. We're storing this information in follows variable, then we're waiting for follows to exist. After that, we're taking the result part of the follows object and we're passing it to its own variable result. We're then grabbing the ID of this button and we're modifying this button to show the name of the last person who followed us, which is in result.data 0.from_name. If it was a new follow that triggered the button, then we can just do a trigger pull data of the display name, store it inside follower, get the button ID and modify the button to show the follower. Don't need to ask Twitch for anything because it already gave it to us. I then have a delete variable command here that I had turned off for testing, but we would delete the variable afterwards so that it's fresh for the next data. The last button is the current viewers button. Again, first we need to look at the triggers for this button, and this is a repeat interval of 60,000 milliseconds or a minute. Inside the commands, we are first using a delete variable with an empty variable box to delete all the variables in this button. Next, we're using get stream info with our channel name in lowercase and saving this in stream info. We're then waiting until the variable exists. Get stream info will only return something if your channel is currently live. If it's not live, it will return empty. This is why we're only waiting half a second to see if the variable exists. If it does exist, it will come in within this time. If it does not exist, we're only waiting half a second. We're then getting the button's ID. We're saying if stream info equals blank, i.e. it doesn't exist, modify this button to say that we're offline. Otherwise, if it does exist, streaminfo.viewAccount will contain the number of viewers currently watching your stream, and we modify the button to show that number as text. Here's an example of the button when you are not currently streaming. And there you can see the button updated automatically, and I've borrowed a friend's account to show that they have 30 viewers. I'll now jump up when it updates. And there's the flash to show that it's updated. It stayed the same, but it did update. And that's it for the LioranBoard Premade Buttons. I hope this helps you in creating your own buttons, and I look forward to hearing about what you do. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.